Hi guys, welcome back. I've decided to for us to jump in to Fusion again and just take a look at all the new renders we have. I have changed some settings in Houdini since I rendered this out, but it's good for us to just sort of compile everything we've done into this comp for now, and then I can do a sort of final video after this where I go back and recap everything that's happening in the Houdini scene and then recap what would be the final comp. So once again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'll talk about stuff you should be thinking about, and the best way probably to bring some of these layers together. And like I said, I'll save all the recap stuff for the next video. So here I have the environment. So let me just set this to fit. So we can have a look at all these layers. You'll see this has the simulated debris, which I think works quite well. It does what it needs to do. And then we have the raw character pass with no lighting from the portal. These ones I've rendered at a lower than full resolution. That's why I have these resizes. This is the character pass with the portal light, which is also working quite well. That's the environment with the portal light, and then we have the dust and the particles. Now you can see the dust was taking quite long, so if I look at the alpha, there's a lot of low density dust here. So that was taking ages to render, so it stops here at 75, which is fine because I only want to see the dust pretty much while the light is shining. So if we look at that without looking at the alpha, I only want to see it there, and by there it should be gone anyway. And then our sandy particles, and I really like this layer. So that's what we've got. So let's basically try and comp that together and see how that all looks with the current state of the portal. So we have this, that's great. We just merge directly on top our character so that we have that base down. I've already ordered this in order of where I think it should go. So the dust and the particles will just go after we've sorted out the whole environment and the lights. So these are our base renders with absolutely no effects except for these pebbles. Then we have these two. So I'm going to merge the character light on top of the character first. And I might have to mask the character out of the environment light because I only had the character as a phantom. So let's see how that will work. So all we need to do is I'm going to actually boolean this. You can do this in Nuke the same way, you just merge and select add. So I'm just setting the boolean to add. There's our character, and we're just adding the portal light on top. And then we need to do the same with the environment. Well, I should actually merge this on underneath. That would make more sense, I think. So what do we have? Environment and environment portal light, character and character portal light. So that makes a bit more sense. There's some weird stuff going on here. I think because I'm also adding the alpha. Yeah, so I just set those booleans to add the light, but not to add the alpha together. And once again in Nuke it would be the same. With the merge, you just switch off the alpha of the A, or the foreground layer. So that actually comes together fine. And you can see our characters being matted out by that matte object we made. So I don't think we need to do anything fancy really to get this environment scene to work well. Unless one of these layers doesn't work. So I'm just going to merge, for starters, just directly merge the dust on top. Well, it's... So I don't like the way it's merging here. What I could do, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to add the environment portal light render on top of the dust. But I'll mask the dust out by itself. So, because I just need the light to be shining through the dust. Like I'm looking at this and it's possible that that is actually physically correct, but obviously we don't have the dust volume. I didn't include it in the environment render as a phantom object, and that's one of the reasons when I have access to a render farm, I actually like to render as much in the camera as I can. So I would have maybe one render that contains all of these passes. In this case, I didn't think to add the dust as a phantom, but I need the dust to be very subtle and soft anyway, so I'll just merge that portal light back on top. So add it just into the dust layer. And I could also have just, say, burned in the dust slightly. So much the same. And then we have these particles. I can hardly see. So I'm going to boost these up. So that's the basis. And now I just want to get the values right, because you can't trust your geolights, and well, obviously we're changing the portal so much in the comp. So yeah, this is green basically. Now that I see the portal, this is completely green. So we need to find those lighting layers. and I'll probably just put down a color corrector for both of them. So I just want this to be, could be a little more, or it could be slightly dimmer and then a lot bluer. So I'm just eyeballing this right now because in general, especially with blue magical stuff, it always tends to be slightly turquoise. So, and I fall into the same trap, but the amount of times you see basically a turquoise effect where the artist has actually been aiming to do a completely magical blue color, is everyone does it. So don't be scared. You need to really try and like push away as much of that green as you can and add as much blue as you can, because a saturated blue is going to make it a much more sort of, it's, people don't know it until they see it, but it makes a big difference to the effect feeling magical. So in this case, just adding a little bit of blue has pretty much made the difference. I could remove more green, but then I have to start removing some red, and that's too far. I'll do the same for the character. And then I need to make sure my dust and my points get the same color. And I actually want to slightly adjust the color of, I don't have this boolean. I'll put that on the dust particles as well. Do I need to? Yeah, I think the dust and the particles and the volume are looking a little bit dull. So I'm just going to boost the blue on these as well. Just enough to get them to feel like they're part of the same lighting situation. And the light in Houdini hasn't done enough. So if I disable and re-enable this, you can see just that slight blue tint, especially down here. Just really helps it sit. And I think the dust is kind of benefiting from that as well. I'm also going to just try gain it up a bit. Or gamma up, gain down. Just to like flatten it out and make sure some of those super low density stuff is visible. That looks pretty good. I'll save. So we have some stuff we need to key out. So still a little bit of merging issues here. If you can see, there's a slight dark area, and it's still coming from this dust pass. Yeah, I should actually color correct this before I add the environment light, because what I'm doing now is I'm darkening it down, which means I'm darkening the environment light down as well. There's a few other things here I would like to tweak, and I am going to play with options with the portal itself. But this is enough to kind of see how I work. After this point, it's basically looking, like I said before, looking at the final result and then just trying stuff. So maybe make the background of the portal effect brighter, maybe take it away again, maybe make some of the hot light, the highlight layers I made, make them super bright, stuff like that, and just gauge it while I'm looking at it. These embers are a bit crazy. I think they work for the first half, and then after the portal disappears, they just hang around for too long. So some of the stuff, I think, as an example quickly, is what I'm looking at is the way the portal looks over this door. So one of the options I have with the portal in general is I could just burn it on. So you do lose some of that dark, some of the dark particles, which I do like. But in general, burning on is a lot of magical stuff will be burnt on, because the idea is that the magic is completely emissive. So you usually make a bunch of emissive layers and then make one or two effects that are shaded normally that you can blend in. So usually when you're working with the brighter super saturated layers, you can just burn those in. In this case, I feel like I've lost too much by fully burning it. So my other option is I could take this environment try and get some contrast in here and then blur it. And then I'll add that on top. Of the portal and mask it out by itself. So just faking some of that sort of backlighting. Maybe that's a bit too much, but I think you can see how successful it can be of just letting the effect really feel like it's being affected by the environment and the lighting. It's just adding a little bit of that spilt over blur or light. So it's faking the spilling of the light through the door onto any points that are dark. So I think that actually works very well. That's me just switching it on and off. So I don't think this is too far away. The main thing I need to do is key off this layer, which appears to be all of it. So I could even key that, just key this here. So that does that. And then maybe mess around with keying down. Say I put down a brightness and contrast here. Or I think this other layer was a worse offender. I felt like it's too visible for too long. So one thing, and this is a personal preference problem, but it's also something you should be considering to get an effect to really pop. And at this point, when it's closed, it would be good if it brightened up slightly, so as if it gained some energy as it shut, and then I can have it fading off. And I want to fade it off a little bit quicker than it is here. So let's say here, I'll go a few frames, and there it can be at its brightest. And I need to ramp this up. So it's not really doing anything, and then suddenly brightens up. It's pretty subtle. So I'm going to do the same on this ramp, kind of just messing around now. Well, I can never remember how to disconnect one of these from the other side. Pretty sure there's something pretty self-explanatory here. Isolate. Nope. Can't remember for the life of me. But I could have that pretty sharply. So sharply going bright, and then sharply going darker, and then slowly fading off. So when we look at that after the glow, it should become a bit more visible. I could just see there's something brightening up. So I could copy this, and here in Fusion you can right click and say, no wait, you copy and then you paste instance. So I could put that onto a few layers, say onto this one and onto the embers. I wanted those to die earlier as well. So I go Control C, paste instance. So that's them keying down. So I'll go through and do stuff like this, just kind of clean it up, tweak layers where I'm not happy with it, key the gain down till they don't exist, if that makes sense. Make sure I have parts of the environment affecting the effects in a realistic way that helps them sit in the environment. And then just experiment with different looks for the portal. This is pretty much what I had in mind, so I might just play around with some layers in between and see if there's anything interesting that comes out of it. So that's almost done. I'll end this video here. We can see the current state of this effect playing through. And then in the last video for this week, I'll go through a big recap of all the updated effects on the Houdini side and everything I changed. And then the final comp for the portal. And then onwards to week 3. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Hi, and welcome to our recap. I'm just going to go through the entire Houdini scene just to cover everything that we've made, and then I'll take you through the final comp, which is, I'm calling it final so that we can move on to the next effect, basically, but there's still loads you can do in that comp. So as we've seen, let me go here, and by the way, I was wrong about the geolight. So before, if you were pointing to geometry, even if you disabled the visual here and you switch the light off, Houdini would try and calculate that geometry, but now apparently that's all fixed. So I don't need to be writing null here and then remembering to remove it. So now if you just disable the light, it won't calculate, which is really good. So now I just force that geometry light in the mantra. So we had this scene and it just has a basic shader on it and the character as well, so nothing fancy there. And even our sky, what we've gone for is just the environment light as a background. So let's have a look at our main object here. It's taking a while. Here we go. So this was the main bulk of our effect, which I think is a pretty decently sized setup. It's not too big and it's pretty readable. So let's just go through quickly the thought process and the way I decided to make the setup the way I did. So as I mentioned at the beginning when we were looking at reference and the fact that compositionally I wanted the portal to feel quite dramatic, and for that reason to fill the entire top half of frame. So with that as well, I decided to not have a solid kind of portal. So what we could have done is have something more like this, in which the portal is forming a sort of solid film and the character would appear then through that. But I decided instead to go for something that tunnels into nothingness. So the character will fly through an open funnel. So for that reason, I desperately wanted something to fly outwards, and I thought it would help if there's a funnel into the room to have lots of particles flying from this point out. For compositional reasons as well, and also because for a portal it just makes sense. If someone's appearing in this environment, then they're coming from somewhere else. So if the particles were moving inward, it would feel like an entrance instead of an exit. So we just stuck to that. So I just, at the origin, put down a sphere, pretty much just set normals to velocity and shot some volume out in the stop. And so we just have a flattened sphere with velocities pointing outward. And I didn't even change any settings on that dot, pretty much. I just plugged it in. It's got basic turbulence, and off it goes. And pretty much the entire setup from that point is based on that original simulation. So an interesting thing you could do is, if you had time, you could actually duplicate this whole node 3 or 4 times and just come up here and change the settings of this volume sim, and then set all these other ROPs to go after that, and you would end up with like a bunch of completely different looking portals. So it's completely procedural from that point of view, where if we can change something up here and everything will go down the pipe and update. So that worked out well. And then we simply took a circle that defines what we wanted the aperture of our portal to be, and ended up using that in a load of places, as you can see here. So once we scattered some points, I haven't really changed anything since you last saw it, I don't think. And you've seen we've used some pop fluids on one of these pop sims here, and the others are just basic normal advection with some pops or wrangles to manipulate the point clouds during the simulation. And I've saved all of those out, and then we came back and added a completely SOP based layer of just points and a noise, which I think actually made a very big difference in the comp in the end. Once we had all of those, they were completely formless, so they didn't look like a portal at all, and we just went and attribute transferred, changed colors, and manipulated that point cloud until it looked more like a portal, or more like we wanted the portal to look. So we did do a slightly different manipulation for each one of these, and we ended up with something pretty cool, I think. So we've got simulations that feel like they're warping in and out of space here, because they're being transferred, their position's being transferred to an animated circle there. And this one in particular was quite interesting. Just putting down a duplicate on that sim, and we got all this crazy stretching here, which I think worked really well. And then all of those once again ran through the same sort of network to warp the portal, bend it into the room. And let me just dive in. So in here, there was just basically a bulge that I kind of thought worked. I put that down at first as a mistake and then decided to stick with it. Thought it could be useful to have the portal slightly leaning into the room. And then the magnet, which is pulling all of the points that are close to the center up, which actually ended up working quite well because of this layer here. So we have, especially from the camera, we're pulling some of those points up into that funnel. So that worked nicely. And then the attribute transfer is the opening. So we're just keying the attributes, the point position attribute being transferred from nothing into something. And as ever, as I said before, the attribute transfer, the only huge drawback there is it's slow. So when you're working with super large point clouds like that, it can get pretty difficult. So I actually ended up applying the same warping subnets to each one of these simulations. Then we just moved it into place. I had to remove some velocity attributes at some points to prevent super long render times, and then simply set our p-scale and our color multipliers. And down here it was just converting one of those particle layers into a VDB and then into geometry for our light. And that's pretty much it. I tried over here to make a light from just the portal shape, but it didn't look nearly as good as the light we made from the particle sim. And then over here is where I've taken the point cloud A and removed some points from it, applied the same transfer and transform, and output that, which is going to our next geometry, which was the embers. And in here, pretty basic, just removed most of these points. We set random p-scales and p-scale multipliers here based on a ramp to make sure we got some good variation in random values. You can see here I've actually gone for the 1/3 on this side, so I've got just a few small ones and then a lot of big ones. And here I'm just using a Voronoi on a grid that has a rest and a UV, so in the shader I can apply a noise based on the rest and use that as the texture. And I think these actually work pretty well as well, given that we didn't need to make a separate setup for these. Just basically copied on these flecks of geometry, and I thought it felt pretty good in the render. And then we did some very basic secondary elements for our environment. So what I really wanted was, when the portal comes on, to really feel like it sits in the environment in a way that the environment reacts. So as the portal opens, these little stones could roll around, some dust and particles can be kicked up. So we went to add those 3 layers, a pretty basic volume sim, actually using pretty much the same setup as the initial particle sims did. And I flattened it. So I did the exact same thing as the particles, and then some noise on the velocity. Just to see that there. And that was that. Inside the DOP, let's have a look what I went with for final velocities. So just the normal density, I've had 10 on the velocity, and I put down a gas turbulence based on density. So actually nothing going on there, but there is a negative buoyancy direction. So right now my sim is 0.025. So that looks okay. And that is running from frame 18 to 30. So one thing I did do, as we know from the first time, is I keyed a transform. to make it feel even more explosive. So now it scales up really quickly, just to try and cover as much ground as possible there. And then I counter animated to get a stable velocity for the particles. Basic pyro shader for that as well. Particles was a basic advection, totally nothing going on there. And debris, pretty much the same thing as the flakes. I just plugged in, I scattered some points and used the same setup as the flakes to make debris geometry. Random p-scale, everything the same. And then in the .NET, I used the volume that does the dust to advect the bullet objects. So that was just set to force. And then some time shifts for all of those elements to kind of either make sure it only appears at a certain time, or to make sure when it reaches a certain frame it stops. So in this case, these get kicked up and then they just stop. So we don't need any of that random bullet objects bouncing around thing. And that's it. We only have one extra light that our portal made. So that blue light from our portal. No other extra lights that come from the actual effect. And then just to save on time and potential re-renders, I've actually split this up into quite a lot of layers. Like I said before, Magic does lend itself well to being split up because you can take it so much further in the comp. With magical stuff, you need to rely on a lot of comping at some point. So that's why I've gone for 4 layers of different particle sims, kept the flakes separate, and then for the dust particles and the dust volume itself and the environment and the character, that probably could have all been rendered in one. But just to save on my individual computer time, and to make sure if I needed to change anything, I didn't have to re-render the whole shot again, I've split it into different layers. And I've pretty much been managing that just with forcing objects and forcing lights. And that's that. So I'll just end this recap here and I'll make a new one where we'll go over the comp. So I'll see you then. Welcome back, guys. So here we're just gonna do a quick recap of what I'm calling the final portal effect. And if I had more time, I'd probably spend more time rendering out point layers with a higher point count. And one of the things we didn't really discuss that much is when I would use rasterized points. So when I would rasterize the point cloud into a volume, or when I decide to actually just render the points straight up. And for me, that's usually dependent on the shot. So if it's a relatively wide shot like this, if I can crank the amount of points up to a level where you can't even tell that it's made out of particles, then it works fine. I'll just leave it. But sometimes you also want something to look particularly smoky and full, so then it makes sense to rasterize. And obviously if it's a closer up shot, you probably need to rasterize to make the most out of your point sim. So not much, this is pretty much the same as we had previously comped it with a few tweaks. So some of those tweaks, I'll pause this quickly, include the animated gain we applied to some of these layers to slightly brighten and darken some of these sims where it felt like it needed to do that. So in this case, like for example these embers, there's a subtle bright flash and then it goes dim quite quickly and then it fades off slowly until they're gone. And if I disable this, you can see they would have just been continuing around the room, which, you know, looks kind of cool, but I've gone ahead and duplicated that keyframe for most of these layers, and that's using the instance which I showed before. The only other thing I've done, and you can see this, the merger of all of these layers still looks pretty much the same, and it does look kind of strange, but I've written that out just as a pre-comp. So from that point onwards, I'm just loading this, because most of the magic is happening here. Playing with levels to make sure I've got range in this point. Before I'm going anywhere near a glow, I'm actually clipping the alpha. So I've put down a brightness and contrast, make sure I've clipped white and it's only affecting the alpha. It's just to manage, you kind of need to manage alpha for a lot of this stuff. If you're burning in or plussing a lot, you've got to make sure that you've got a consistent alpha. And if I put my mouse over here and you look down to the bottom of the screen here, you can see my alpha value is going all the way above 1. So I keep that in check. Here I'm merging the flakes on, and then we come in with this 3 blurred glow, which gives me a very soft glow. And the whole point of that for me is to do a glow that I have so much control over that I can sort of make sure that you can never see the edge of one of these glows. So I never want to see something like that. It's actually very subtle. It looks quite strong on black, but in the scene it's mainly a sort of soft grade, but it makes a big difference. And then some final contrasting, and I'm displacing itself. So I have this sort of gamut up value here, clipped white, and I'm plugging that in displace, and if I disable that, you can see it's just displacing outwards from this area. So that kind of helps make it feel a bit more magical, and it helps with the points, because here it looks quite particulate, and this could help sort of merge everything together. And if you go really extreme, it looks pretty freaky. And then I've taken the environment render and used that to manipulate the color of our darker points there, just to help with the integration. And I think that works pretty well as well. For the environment, it's the same as it was. I have a few resizes here because some of my layers I forgot to render full res. I have a subtle glow. So I didn't go for my full glow setup because I just wanted the door to bleed a little bit. And then, like I said, I've copied that brightness and contrast keyframe, and just so that the light also quickly goes brighter and then fades off when the rest of the portal fades off. And then the biggest thing which I added is to take the portal and put the same kind of displays affecting the environment before I merge the portal on. So if you look here, that's adding that refractiveness, which so much in the magical effects stuff, especially from directors and clients, they want to see the effect warp the environment slightly, and it works really well, especially with this mode. In Nuke, I haven't found something as good as this, so I'm still on the lookout, but this is just perfect. So you can see if we look at the full image now, we do have pretty much the full top half of frame covered in this blue magic. And if I disable this displace, you can see how everything shifts slightly behind the portal, and when I play it, it leaves like this interesting rippling effect here. So the subtle bending of this environment here from that displace is kind of really effective. And that's it. So nothing too complicated going on here. It's just basically bringing these layers together in a way that's useful, and then, you know, just tweaking those values and colors until it looks right. There's so many ways you can go with this setup as well. As I showed before, like just brightening up or just dimming down one or two of those layers gives a completely new type of effect. So even if I take my pre-comped layers here and I look at the final image and I come back before the glow, I can knock this right back, and that kind of much more subtle, that's a bit more naturalistic, and it's something like that is probably what you would see in a live action feature film. So they don't go for so intense that, well, in most movies where it's well done, it'll be something like this where there's maybe one element that's super intense and everything else is kind of dull, but it works because it's sitting on top of a background that's just completely uninteresting. So that's kind of the realistic looking portal. I have a habit of over cranking everything, so my final version looks like this. And obviously there's places you can go beyond that as well if you want to get ridiculous. You can see that background layer of points that we made in SOPs is playing a huge part in kind of merging this whole portal together. So if I just put the gamma up, you can see loads more going on. And maybe less saturated, maybe more. So lots of range, lots of options, especially if you come all the way back here. And I mean, it's pretty much got everything we need from Houdini, and the rest of the art making process can happen in here. So I hope you enjoyed week 1 and 2, and I'll see you in week 3, and we'll take on the magical shield. Bye.